also have started to transition into consulting with businesses and other law firms on how to move away from a traditional male model of success into implementing a feminist leadership structure. And I've found that to really be my passion. So that is the type of work that I'm currently doing.
So what does that mean, a feminist leadership structure?
Sure. So a feminist leadership structure, and again, I'm going to use that word freely today, but I don't usually use it when I'm doing trainings or even talking with my own partnership. Because like I said, I am in a male-dominated profession, and my partners are all male with the exception of myself and one junior partner who's female. But a feminist leadership structure really means that I call it resolution-oriented, that we are able to communicate, we're resolution-oriented, we actually have adopted, if you are all familiar with Brene Brown's engaged feedback principles, there's 10 of them. So we have adopted those, although when I transitioned into that communication style with my partners, I didn't actually tell them that that's what we were doing, because you don't always get buy-in if things are labeled. So we do things like practice. If you have a problem, we take that problem and put it next to us. This sounds a little cheesy, but you put it next to you instead of between you. So you can address the problem laterally instead of having the problem between you. So I would encourage all of you to actually go look up Brene Brown's engaged feedback principles, but we do that. One of the main things of a feminist leadership structure within a firm setting is that we do not incentivize the traditional male model of success. So my firm is a billable hour firm, and that means that every day I go to work and I have to bill my clients in 6-minute increments. And firms have a billable hour requirement, and you hear a lot of lawyers talk about billable hour requirements and the burden that that places on them. So we actually do not have a billable hour requirement in our firm. We use other key performance indicators, and we've really moved away from that traditional male model of a success, meaning you come to work from 7:30 a.m. until 6 p.m. or later. And then the way that you get work is by going out for drinks to the country club or wherever else with a senior partner. And that's where they talk about cases, and that's where you get access to cases. I was raised in a firm where that was how you did have access to cases and to partners. And we have stopped doing that. And instead, each lawyer is encouraged to create their own model of success. And we encourage lawyers and we incentivize lawyers to use those different models of success. And we really try to tell them, you are not here to litigate in the traditional way. And so what that means for me as a mom is that I am not required to litigate like a man. I have a different support system. I don't have a stay-at-home spouse who is able to take care of my kids. My husband also works. And then of course you have single moms, right, that are trying to litigate. So my model of success looks very different from my partner's model of success. I have a very flexible work schedule. I have different billable hour requirements. My client development scheme looks very different from theirs. We don't do drinks after work and talk about cases. That's not how people get cases anymore. So those are all sort of components of feminist leadership structure within our firm.
So you've talked about your firm and how this works with law firms, but what about for the rest of society? I mean, what can we learn, or what can we take from that, and how can we help further that in our own lives?
Yeah, so if you're not in a firm, and again, I do some trainings for insurance companies as well on how to institute this type of leadership model. The key component here is really not forcing your employees to follow that traditional or patriarchal model of success, right? So you need to have the flexibility within your business to allow, or your nonprofit, to allow each employee to look at their life circumstances and then tailor their work schedules. Their entire work functions need to be tailored around their own individual needs. And then once you have that in place, it's critically important to then have the business or nonprofit actually incentivize the employees to follow that, right? So what you don't want to do is have a situation where you say, I'll just use my example, or my situation where you say to a mom, working mom, you can totally have a flexible schedule, but your billable hour requirement is still, 2,000 hours a year, or if you're in a corporation, right? Like you can have a flexible work schedule, but you're still required to do all of the things that are in that traditional model, male model of success, because all that does is just place additional pressures on working moms. So I'm just going to speak about that specifically. And Kim, you may empathize with this. I feel like our generation, it was sort of a shift when we became professionals, in that the model of success for us was we were to litigate like men, right? But then also we were at the top of our game if we were managing all of the kids' needs as well, right? Like you were doing a great job if you were the Pinterest mom, if you were there for all the school programs, if you did everything and you were the top of game in your profession. But what we have found is that that is incredibly unhealthy for women. It makes bad business women. It makes for poor mental health for us. It does not make us good lawyers or business women to have to do that. So when I talk about these alternative models of success, it's taking all of that into account. So for instance, like I said, I have a lower billable hour requirement, and there would be different key performance indicators for each individual person.
Well, thank you for that. You know, I actually worked at a private law firm, like you're at, like a civil law firm, while I was serving the legislature, while I was in the process of having children. And our law actually says in Montana that you aren't supposed to, as an employer, put any barriers in a way for somebody serving the legislature. So I could serve in the legislature. I just had to do everything else that I was supposed to do otherwise, which is why it was a very short-lived career there. Even though they're nice people, it just didn't work out for my life.
Well, I don't know if you recall, but quite a while ago, I think it was, I don't recall when your child was born, maybe it was your second child, but you interviewed with our firm, and that was back before we had made this cultural shift. And it wasn't, I mean, one of the discussions was it was hard for my male partners to wrap their head around, could she juggle all of this? Like that was, and that is really what I'm talking about here, is that those are not the questions we should be asking, because when we're asking those questions, the expectation is that can she juggle all this and litigate in the way that we know how to litigate, which is having an at-home support system, right? Because that's their reality, is that they have at-home support systems, and they don't juggle a lot of other things. And so those really aren't the questions that should be asked, is, oh, can she juggle this? It's, let's let her, we see that there's value. She's bright, she's articulate, she would be a great lawyer. Let's create a position here for her, and then, you know, pay her, you know, in line with everyone else. So.
Well, it's nice to see that shift happening. What do you think? How do you think that COVID-19 and the pandemic, we've seen that, and we've read, of course, that women have been set back by that because women are typically paid less. And so when somebody has to stay at home, it would be the woman, because she earns less money if somebody has to take care of the children. So it would be her. What have you seen, and what can you tell our listeners? Like, how do you come back after that, or how do you shift your life, and maybe people have realized that the life path they were on wasn't really good for them?
I am so glad you asked that question. It's an excellent question. So even in my firm, which is now far more progressive for female lawyers and other diverse types of lawyers, I'll be very frank and honest, we had major backsliding this past year with the individual situations when COVID-19 hit. And so in our firm, we closed down like a lot of other places because it wasn't safe really to go out. We just didn't know, you know, the vaccines weren't out. And so we had closed down for the safety of our employees, and everyone was supposed to work at home. The situation we had was that, again, my male counterparts who have at-home support systems were able to come in the office and bill all the hours that they needed to bill. I was in a situation, along with my other female partner, where we were trying to manage our job, meet our billable goals, and still continue to do client development. I run the finances in our firm, so managing all of that, and schooling my children while my husband was at work, and it was untenable. And I was very disheartened that at the end of the year, when we were talking, you know, about how we had performed and how that translates into compensation, that was held against me. The fact that my billable hours were not as high as everyone else's, despite the fact that I had done things like, secured PPP loans for our firm and had done a great job in keeping our business afloat financially, all while managing my children. And so I really saw the backsliding of there is this underlying expectation that when women are adhering to that traditional model of success and managing everything else, it does become the baseline expectation from the other men that you work with, right? And so I feel like we had a lot of backsliding into the idea that, well, this is the basic expectation. We know that you can manage your kids and do all of this. So they were frustrated that that didn't happen. I was frustrated with what I perceived to be their ignorance. And one of the things that we did do, which I'm very proud of us for doing this, is we were able to communicate and talk through it. And part of that feminist leadership structure is knowing when you don't have the answers. And we actually reached out to a professional facilitator, and we are having a facilitation done with our partnership in August to help work through some of these issues, because it felt so raw for me and the other female partner to be put back in that position, that we needed an outside person to help us. So, the reality is COVID-19 was extremely difficult for working women and working moms, single moms, just very, very difficult. And it did impact women's pay. And we have seen a lot of women that have not gone back into the workforce. So I will say, if you are in a position of leadership and management, it is incumbent upon you to ensure that you're addressing those issues with the women that work with you and for you, period. And this may not be a time where they are mentally or emotionally strong enough to always advocate for themselves. So it's really critical that we're keeping an eye out for that and helping them continue on their career path.
So you've talked about your work through your law practice some, and you barely touched on what you've done through Missoula Rises. I was hoping you could talk just maybe more about, the work in general that you're doing to fight sexism and work for equality, and why that's so important.
Yeah, and so a lot of my, I have addressed my firm a lot, and a lot of my work in regards to sexism and fighting for women is actually in the corporate workforce, because I see that is where it is needed the most. You both are very in tune with social justice circles and activists, and I feel like there's a lot more progression that way. However, in the corporate structure, it's still very, very old school, still very patriarchal without really even any understanding. And so just one tiny example, I'm veering off a little bit, but our firm recently, I had all of our lawyers go through diversity and inclusion training that hadn't been done. That might seem crazy to people who are in the activist nonprofit world, but in the corporate sector, especially Montana firms, like that's not something that's usually addressed. And we just included our pronouns in our signature block, which again, doesn't sound like a big deal to people who are in like the activist nonprofit line of work, but for, people who are in like the corporate Montana corporate sector, that is different. There is not a lot of that. And so I'm trying to take, actually, this is where the dovetailing begins. I'm trying to take the things that I have learned very clearly from community activism and hearing like what the community wants and needs, and then transitioning my knowledge base into like the corporate structure of our firm, and then other obviously like larger insurance companies. So that's sort of where that dovetails. But I had mentioned previously that one thing about the Missoula activist scene is it's a tough place to be in. Like I said, your blind spots are pointed out to you, and I think that's incredibly important. It's a really good thing. But one trend that I have seen is there seems to still be a pretty heavy tone of really, I'm just going to call it like the patriarchy again, that exists within like progressive men, honestly. And I think that it's really critical for women as we're working our way either through our activist lives or even our professional lives, that we're always keeping in mind what is our end goal, and recognizing where there are those patriarchal structures, and when they are there, understanding that they don't work for you, they will never work for you. And in fact, what we found, through my trainings and through our firm is that they don't work for men either. They're really bad for men. And so I would encourage women, as you are working through these things in your personal lives, to really be introspective and thoughtful as to where those systems are in place, and making sure that you're not falling prey to them, and understanding that even if you think this system looks like it may work for me, my experience, personal experience, has been when I try and compete in a patriarchal setting, I will always get kicked off the ladder, because those systems are not made for me. And, you know, Kim, I think you might be able to, I know that you can sympathize with this potentially. We've talked about this privately, but, you know, even politics, people have said like, oh, have you ever thought about running? And I currently am of the mindset, it's a tough sell for women to want to get involved in politics, because that is a system that was set up by men for men. And women who throw their hat in the ring, I am so in awe of and appreciative that you do it, because I think it's a very, very tough place, incredibly tough place for women to be. I think that, you know, I see women get kicked off the ladder all the time by other progressive men and women who don't really understand what those systems are doing. So does that answer your question at all?
It really does. So through your work, what is some of the stuff you've actually been able to accomplish that you can, you know, say you feel good about?
Yeah, so I feel like my biggest accomplishment to date has really been changing the structure of my firm. Just because to understand that accomplishment, you would need to really have understood the firm that I was like raised in or grew up in, I guess. You know, I started there as a legal intern, and I'm still at the same firm. And it was just incredibly centered around that male model of success. And you know, it was billable hour focused. It said it was family friendly, but people were penalized. Women and men too were penalized for prioritizing family time. Family friendly meant that there would be like a family party a couple times a year. It didn't really mean that it was family friendly. I mean, before I became a managing partner, just to give you like some anecdotal context too, with my first pregnancy, I was definitely penalized financially with my salary. And it took me a long time to work my way back up to where I should have been, simply because I was pregnant and had my daughter. And I had a pregnancy that I lost in between my daughter and my son. And that was around the time that I was up for partnership. And I didn't even feel like I could tell my partners I was pregnant, because I was worried that it would impact my ability to still be offered partnership. And so I didn't tell them, and I miscarried. And after I miscarried, I was still trying to negotiate the terms of my partnership contract. This was 3 days after I miscarried. I was still bleeding heavily. And the entire time I was negotiating with my partners, I was thinking about, am I bleeding through my pantsuit? Am I you know, just trying to keep myself together emotionally and mentally, and still be on point to negotiate the terms of my partnership agreement. I did become partner, but after that dealt with pretty severe sexual harassment from a partner that's no longer with our firm. So for us to go from that kind of firm to where we are now, where we embrace different models of success, we are not billable hour focused, we are resolution oriented, and we allow lawyers to create a working model that works for them, and we reward them financially for doing that. That feels like a really big accomplishment to me. And I want that to be the legacy of my firm, because for civil trial lawyers, there are very few women, especially moms, that are civil trial lawyers. We are a very small percentage of it. And so to be able to come from where I was and to be a named partner in the firm, to running the firm finances and to creating that legacy feels critically important to me. And it also shows both of my children that you can quote unquote do it all without sacrificing your mental health. So that I feel like has been my biggest accomplishment.
Well, that's a really big one for people to understand. There are I think 3 civil trial lawyers who are women with children. There really aren't that many. And if you look at the Montana Trial Lawyers Association, you can see the gender breakdown quite starkly on that. So what can you tell listeners? What are some resources if somebody is working at a job where maybe they aren't in a leadership position, but they do feel the crush of sexual harassment and the unequal treatment and, you know, the constant slights that kind of permeate sexism, the sexism culture we live in sometimes. What are some resources that they can turn to and that they can gain skills or at least gain some help?
Mm-hmm. So I am glad that you asked that, and I'm going to address that in two parts. First of all, one of the things that I found critical in dealing with these issues was identifying mentors that could help me, and understanding that oftentimes those mentors are not going to be in your job or your business, which I know sounds weird. But some of my mentors were actually my clients. So I had large, powerful clients who were also women, and there was actually one man, he was Hispanic, and they were my mentors, and they had the leverage because they were some of our larger clients to help me effectuate change within our firm because they had that financial leverage over our firm, right? So it's being smart about finding who your mentors are and looking outside of your own job to find those mentors. And your mentors are not, if you're a female, they're not always going to be women. Like I said, there's a lot of male allies that are there that can really help you. So first and foremost, identifying who your mentors are and being really strategic about that. And then in terms of like local resources, I honestly, one really great resource is Empower Montana. That might sound a little bit weird, but even where I am now, when I have had issues within my firm, I have called Empower. They're the ones that did the diversity and inclusion training for us. And they also helped address some of our issues that we were having, just our communication issues. They are an amazing resource. I worked with Brooke Core there, and Alex Taylor Kim, I think it was his name also. They're an incredible resource. So I would encourage, you to reach out to Empower Montana, and then really building up that solid network of, I'm just going to say, women to support you in your profession is very important. So, and if you have questions or want to just talk, I mean, people can always reach out to me too. I have dealt with this a lot, well, all of my professional career, and still continue to, but I'm also happy to talk with people.
So I was hoping you could address one thing that we're going to turn it over really soon to questions from people. So if you all have questions, put them in the chat box and Erin will address them. But frequently when we're talking about feminism or even women's rights, some people see it as a women's versus men's issue. And I was hoping you could address that because you did touch on how actually even patriarchal models of management are bad for men also. So I was just hoping that you could address that fallacy.
Yes, I am so grateful that you brought that up because that actually has been the cornerstone of my work with my trainings with different insurance company clients as well as other law firms and my own firm, is understanding that feminism, although I don't use that word, but for today's talk, I will. It is actually equality for all genders, and it's what the research shows and what we have seen, I have seen anecdotally in my own firm, is that when you do have a feminist leadership structure or you're employing those types of models, it is better, so much better for men. It takes the pressure off them. Their mental health is a lot better when they actually realize, I don't have to communicate this way. I don't have to practice this way. So it is incredibly beneficial for men. So just to break it down a little bit further, one of the things we did in our firm is that we have, for all employees, whether you're a file clerk up to a senior managing partner, we have 4 months paid maternity leave as just the basis. So 4 months off and it's paid maternity leave. And then after that, we will talk about and offer very flexible work schedules for people to be able to be with their children or their babies. And so families. But in addition to that, we have also strongly encouraged, and we've seen, the men in our firm take part in paternity leave, which is, I want them to do that. I want them to prioritize their families too, because it just makes them healthier, right? Like it's healthier for them. They are better lawyers. And in addition to that, there is not the same type of resentment when they see moms out of the office. And that can go for someone who is taking care of elderly parents or a special needs aunt and uncle. Like it really doesn't matter if you're a working mom or what it is, but each person should have the flexibility to attend to their personal needs and work that within their work schedule in a healthy way. And so you are absolutely right that the patriarchal structure is equally as bad for men as it is for women. And we have seen that play out in our own firm as well.
All right, well, thanks for answering those. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Sophie. to ask some questions that people want to know. If you guys have questions, please go ahead and throw them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will go ahead and answer them. So Erin is a wealth of information, and I'm going to turn it over to Sophie now. Go ahead, Sophie.
Thanks for the introduction, Kim, and thank you so much, Erin, for joining us today. I have a whole slew of great questions from the public here, and if anyone wants to get a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll make sure that it gets answered today. So the first question kind of goes to the broader, theme that you might be seeing here. Someone wants to know if you've seen any traction in the private sector and the corporate world, especially in Montana, in implementing more equitable work cultures.
That is a great question. I will say private sector nationally, yes, very much so. Our largest clients, so larger companies like Liberty Mutual, Geico, those, I see it in their corporate structures quite a bit. And that's why I said I've used them as mentors and guidance for our firm. Boy, in Montana, in the private sector, I think, unfortunately, we are still, we have a lot of work to do still in the private sector in Montana. That's my take on it. Of course, I'm specifically looking at it from the law firm perspective, but I mean, we're a good 10 or more years behind in terms of equitable, places for other diverse and women lawyers to work. I think that we are still quite a ways behind.
Thanks for that answer. This person is asking, we have been talking mostly about gender in this conversation. How does the issue of racial inequity fit into this conversation in Montana? And I'd also like to just tag on to that too, like sexual orientation.
Yep. And that is a great question. And so I hope I clarified this at the beginning, but I was talking about my experience as working mom in relation to this. But in terms of racial inequity and gender identity, that was actually one of the reasons that we did the training with Empower Montana, because I have seen that, especially in the private law firm sector, there is just a complete blind spot, total blind spot to those issues. I don't want to say total, but pretty heavy blind spot. I mean, law firms in Montana are predominantly cis male white. I mean, that's just what they are. And without really a lot of understanding of those other issues. And so one of the first things that I did, this was 2 years ago, is I drafted, with the help of actually a national client who had a wonderful diversity and inclusion plan, I drafted a comprehensive diversity and inclusion plan for our law firm that we implemented, and part of that was the diversity and inclusion training. But those issues play in heavily here in this conversation. It's something that we look at in our firm. One of our primary goals is to diversify our firm, and I don't just mean women, but across the board diversify. And I always hear in Montana, well, it's just hard because we're all white. Like, I hear that all the time from law firms and from other private sectors, is it's too hard for us to diversify. And it's such an easy way out to just say that, when it's actually not true. And especially one of the benefits of what's happened with the pandemic is so many more people are now working remotely from home, and a lot of people are moving to Montana, which gives us a great opportunity, right, to be able to diversify our workplaces. One of the things that I have done, this is sort of a different topic, but I've done national talks on, is the importance of racial diversity, gender diversity in a law firm setting, and how that actually, there's tons of studies behind this, how that actually increases revenue and innovation and is so much better for your firm as a whole. But in Montana, like I said, again, we are way behind. And one of the things, I'm kind of rambling here, but I just wanted to say one last thing about that. One of the things that I've put in place in our firm is, before we say, let's go hire diverse lawyers, we actually are doing the groundwork to make our firm a place where diverse lawyers can work, and that takes time. So that's the process that we're working on now, is really ensuring that when we are able to attract and hire diverse lawyers, that it is a place where they can safely work, and there will be management there that will support them and treat them fairly and help them grow in their profession.
Thank you for that answer. this next question is sort of switching the conversation a little bit. You had mentioned earlier some issues dealing with gender equity within the Montana progressive like political scene, and especially in Missoula. And I was wondering if you would just speak some more about maybe some solutions that you see to this issue, ways that we can address this within the progressive scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see, and this could be a limited view, it's just based on my experience, but I have seen a trend to really be following the voices of straight white progressive men. I see that happening a lot in some of our, especially in Missoula, in some of the communities. And I think the very basic thing we need to do here is listen to people of color first, listen to our Indigenous leaders, listen to women, like stop and listen to what they're saying and what their experiences are, and let them actually lead. Like let them lead, and don't have a situation where when they try and lead, they're cut down by straight white progressive male voices. I don't really know how else to say it other than that. Is I just feel like there's a lot of undermining, a lot of talking and not enough listening and following. And I think that that is the very first thing that each activist group, I know nonprofits are pretty darn good about this, I will say, but I'm just talking about like activist groups. I think it's really critically important that you're really examining who are the voices who are in a position of leadership, look at them, and regardless of what their intent is, take a step back and think, are there other voices that we should be centering or raising up, and listen to them and follow their lead.
Thank you for that. This is the last question that I have so far, but if people would like to submit questions, this is kind of your last call. So this question, coming from an attendee, is asking, you know, your work in the corporate world, in the activist world, that work, as you have noted, can be really disheartening and pretty grating. How do you keep the faith in the work that you do?
That's when I rely on my network of women. Honestly, it is. And when I look and see the good work that's being done, I mean, I'm just going to use the two of you as an example of this again, right? Like when I look and see the work that other people are doing and how far they've come despite setbacks that they've had, like Kim, I think you're a really awesome example of that. Like that's what gives me faith. Like it makes me really happy. And I also will always believe in the power of human connection and our ability to want to ultimately do the right things when we are openly talking, listening, and working together. And that's honestly what gives me the faith, because, or helps me keep the faith, because it is very grating. But when you get back down to the building blocks of it, or the basics, like if we just sit down, like as people, and it sounds so basic, but, and we're really listening to each other and providing that space and grace to move forward, that's really what helps me keep the faith. So
thank you for that. And we actually just got another question in. This listener is asking, well, there's a statement first and then a question after. So the most effective activity I engaged in was to raise a feminist daughter. Much of that, she now tells me, came from what I did, not necessarily what I said to her directly. Unfortunately, she still faces many of the same issues that I did at her age. I wish I'd had a son too. We need more feminist men. Toxic masculinity is a part of the problem. What are your thoughts on how to acknowledge and address this?
Yep, you are. Whoever said that is 110% spot on. One of my greatest joys, and I know achievements, is not only raising a feminist daughter, but absolutely raising a feminist son. I am very grateful to have a son, to be able to have him understand all of these issues. And I am confident that even at his tender age of 11, as I see him progressing and having access to a lot of, just culture around him, pop culture, I am so encouraged by the things that he will, conversations he will partake in, and conversations that he will actively shut down with his friends. And that is not by saying to him, this is what toxic masculinity is. It is by modeling for him, this is how we treat people, period. And having my husband model that, as well as my daughter. So there is a huge source of empowerment from raising a son and a daughter. I'm very grateful to do that, because I talk about my firm legacy, but that's my real legacy, is watching them grow into good humans that reject and do not practice toxic masculinity. And then I just wanted to add one other thing there. I had the really wonderful opportunity to be asked to work with a fraternity. This was a year and a half ago. And they had me come in once a month and just meet alone with the guys in that fraternity and be a space, because at that fraternity, they don't have obviously like a house mother or anything like that, but just be a space for them to be able to talk to a woman about issues and questions that they may have. And that was a huge challenge, because how am I going to connect with boys that age? I mean, I don't have kids that age. We were a host family for a hockey player that was, 19. He's 20 now, but still it was like, that was a challenge for me to create a rapport with them. But that was hands down one of the most rewarding experiences I have ever had, is building a relationship with those guys and allowing them to ask the questions. And what I found was, again, they don't want to have to keep up this facade or this front of toxic masculinity, of being the bro, of, they actually want to talk in a safe space with someone about all of these issues that they don't have anyone else to talk to about comfortably and safely. And we covered a lot of ground. Like, I'm not a therapist or anything. I was just there to hear them and talk with them and hear what their issues are. But they jumped right into asking questions about consent with girls at parties. And I was shocked at how much they wanted to talk and how much ground we were able to cover. And the issue of toxic masculinity came up a lot, like over and over, and usually brought up by them. So again, it's really important that, when the opportunity presents itself, that we're listening, because, for men too, for boys too, like, that patriarchal system does not work for them.
Well, thank you so much for answering all those listener questions, and to everyone who asked questions, thank you for participating. I went ahead and posted the Public Policy Institute of the Rockies information, as well as Erin's information. So if anyone has additional questions or would like to follow up, you can do so at those links. And otherwise, thank you so much, Erin, for taking listener questions. I really appreciate it.
So Erin, it's posted in our chat box, but could you actually tell us what your contact information is for people to reach you if they see this later on the television or on the podcast?
Sure. You can reach me in several different ways. You're always welcome to email me at erickson@bebtlaw.com. So feel free to reach out to me that way. And then you can direct message me on Instagram. I think my Instagram handle is in there. You're going to make me repeat it.
That's okay. They can just email.
Thank you.
Unless, Sophie, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I can go ahead and say it out loud. It's at @E_M_Erickson. Perfect.
I recently changed it. It used to be, for the longest time, it was at B's, because my daughter's name is Beatrice. We call her B. So it used to be at B's mom, M-U-M. And after a while, I was like, I just don't really want to be always identified as her mom. So, I mean, I love being her mom, but, it's important for us to, so I was like, this needs to be my own name.
Nice. That's very true. Well, Sophie, thanks for asking those questions. And Erin, thanks for answering them. For the last part of our talk now, I'm going to ask you the final 4 questions that are intended to let people get to know you just a little bit more. What's a podcast you're listening to now that you'd recommend to others?
So I just finished a podcast within the last 2 days that was so good. I binged on it very heavily. And a lot of you may have already heard of it, but if you haven't, you have to listen to it. It's called Stolen, and it is by Connie Walker. And it actually is about the disappearance in the case of Jermaine Charlo. But it is it was put together by an investigative journalist who's an Indigenous woman from Saskatchewan, who specifically reports on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And the way that she weaves in all of the underlying issues regarding, settlers and colonialism and the Indigenous issues into her investigation of this was phenomenal. It is an excellent podcast. So I would highly, highly recommend it. It's Stolen by Connie Walker. And I think Gimlet, Gimlet Media is who put it on. And it will feature some people that you know. A lot of you may know Lauren Rodriguez. She's an Indigenous activist here in Missoula. She actually was the one who reached out to Connie to ask her to investigate this, and she's featured on there as well. So
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Who is your favorite singer?
That's such a hard question because music is totally how I process all of my emotions. So I have a lot of them. So I'll just talk, I guess, sort of my mainstays. I've always loved Coldplay, and even more so now because my daughter figure skates to a lot of their songs. So I love Coldplay. I love Brandi Carlile and just got to see her in concert. And for listeners, if you don't listen to Brandi Carlile, you should definitely listen to her song called The Joke. It relates to some of the issues that we've talked about today. It's hands down one of my favorite songs of hers. And then Flo Milli, I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but every time before I have an important court hearing or something like this, I always play her song on repeat, I Am. So I would recommend that you guys go listen to it. I tell my daughter to listen to that. If she could on a daily basis, it's pretty empowering. So those are some of my favorites.
All right. Where's your favorite place to go in Montana?
Hands down, Flathead Lake. I was raised on the shores of Flathead Lake in Folsom, Montana, and I love to go back to my home there where I was raised. We were just there for the 4th of July. So it's my favorite place just to relax and rejuvenate.
Great. What's the best advice you were ever given?
Probably two pieces of advice. One when I was much older, and it's so simple, but it's just that like no is a complete sentence. Like no is a complete sentence, and you have the right and permission to say no. You have the right to say no to anything you need to. So no is a complete sentence is one of them. And then the other one, my husband always says, and I do like it, and we tell our kids this, that you get more bees with honey. So instead of right off the bat assuming the worst of someone and being adversarial, try giving them some honey and give them a little space and grace and a little love and kindness, and then see where that takes your conversation. So.
Oh, that's great advice. Well, Erin, thank you so much for being with us today. It was great talking with you and great hearing your thoughts on all this stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all the work you both do.
Oh, thank you. And to everyone who's listening today, thanks for listening. We're hosting these talks to provide an opportunity for people to hear about others working to shape our state, and also so you can learn how to be involved. You can reach us at the Public Policy Institute of the Rockies by email at info@ppir.org, Facebook at Public Policy Institute of the Rockies, Twitter at Policy Rockies, and Instagram at PPI of the Rockies. If you want to listen to Erin again or any of our past Tuesday talks, you can find them, our podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And you can also watch this again, the live recorded version, on MCAT. They'll be playing on local community access television, which is a great benefit for our town, and community television in general is great. So thank you all for listening. We'll be back again next month with another episode. So tune in then, and let's keep moving Montana forward together. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.